Hello and welcome to our joint Galen Data and Greenlight Guru Medical Device Innovation webinar. My name is Keith Drake. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Galen Data. We're joined today by two medical device pioneers, John Speer and Chris DuPont. And today we're going to address a very important regulatory issue, post-market surveillance. We'll address how successful medical device companies de-risk their post-market surveillance and specifically learn how integrating electronic QMS, quality management systems, and cloud connectivity facilitates effective compliance, reducing your cost and your risk in the post-market world. And of course, at the end of the webinar, we'll take your questions. Gentlemen, welcome. John, let me ask you to introduce yourself, give your background, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Greenlight Guru product.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Keith and Chris. It's a pleasure to join you as well on this webinar, and all the Galen Data team. Thank you so much for all your time, effort, and energy to put this together. So looking forward to it. As Keith indicated, I'm John Speer. I'm the founder at Greenlight Guru. I've been in medical device industry for over 22 years, coming up on my 23rd anniversary, which is so weird to think about that I've been in this space for so long. But I've had a great time. I've done a lot of work in medical device product development. I've had the opportunity to bring over 40 products to market. I've implemented quality systems at many companies over the years. I've done a lot of work in regulatory as well. And as the founder at Greenlight Guru, I had this idea back in the day about a way to make life simpler for medical device professionals. Check it out, www.greenlight.guru to learn more. And to share a little bit about Greenlight Guru, and as we get started into today's session, we are the only medical device success platform in the market today, designed specifically and exclusively for the medical device industry by actual medical device professionals. We have workflows to help you manage your design, development, risk, document management, record management, as well as post-market quality events, which is what we're going to get into a little bit today. Things like CAPAs, complaints, non-conformances. Again, check that out, www.greenlight.guru to learn more. We also have a ton of content in the form of articles. You can participate and listen into the Global Medical Device Podcast. We also have a Greenlight Academy, lots of things there. So my contact information will be shared. And if you want to learn more about all the different resources that we have, just let me know.
Thank you, John. Yes, I will say Greenlight Guru is a very comprehensive resource for the industry, far beyond quality management systems. So thank you for your contribution to the industry. Chris, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you can segue into telling us about the Galen Cloud product.
Absolutely. Good morning. Thanks for everybody joining. John, super excited that you could join us, and our friends at Greenlight Guru. It's an awesome platform. My name is Chris. I'm the co-founder of Galen. I have deep expertise in medical device. Started my career at NASA, but quickly shifted over to the medical device industry. I have a master's in electrical engineering. The medical device bug caught me, and I made a long decision a long time ago to stay in the medical device industry. It's super exciting. We're starting to see real transformation happen in connected medical devices, and that takes us into the next slide, Keith. So what is Galen? Galen Data, we're in the business of building one-off custom solution medical device clouds about 4 or 5 years ago. And as most of y'all know, most medical devices aren't connected. We started to see a fundamental change in the industry about 4 or 5 years ago. And of course, COVID is accelerating that. So we were solving part of the problem out there in industry, building these one-off custom solutions. It was very expensive, and it took us a long time to build each one of these systems. And then early stage medical devices were coming to us, and they also needed a FDA compliant cloud connectivity solution, and they couldn't afford that high dollar, $500,000 price. So we saw an opportunity. We were solving a problem in industry, and we saw another problem that wasn't being solved. So we built the Galen Cloud, purpose built for the medical device industry. Galen is ISO 13485 certified, and that's one of my areas of expertise. I've built multiple quality management systems from scratch, writing all the procedures along with some of the software tools, CAPA, equipment tracking, doc control. And so now we have the Galen Cloud purpose-built for the medical device industry, and we're just getting started on this new paradigm shift in the connected world.
Thank you, Chris. And it's an exciting time, isn't it, gentlemen? Let me briefly review the logistics for today's webinar. At any time, our audience can submit your questions for the Q&A session in the questions window in your console. The console also provides the ability to download informational handouts, both from Galen Data and from Greenlight Guru. In the chat window, we're posting right now a link to Galen Data's Definitive Guide to Medical Device Connectivity. It's a 30-page white paper, very comprehensive, provides guidance in a number of areas for medical device connectivity. We're going to conduct 2 polls to learn more about you, our audience, during the webinar. And then by email, we will follow up with a link to a recording of our webinar today. Here's our topics for today. We're going to cover a lot of ground, so strap in. It's going to be a fast and wild ride. First, we'll establish a baseline. What is post-market surveillance? And then we'll segue a bit into what is the current status quo process? How has post-market surveillance been performed traditionally, even up to today? And then we're going to be a little bit forward-looking. If you employ an electronic QMS such as Greenlight Guru, there are certainly enhancements and efficiencies that you will enjoy for your post-market surveillance. And the same thing for medical device cloud connectivity. We'll talk about enhancements for post-market surveillance gained there as well. And then we're going to be very forward-looking if we were to employ both electronic QMS and cloud connectivity. What additional benefits could we afford? But before we get into it, we want to learn more about you, our audience. So right now we're posting a poll. And if you could just simply answer this question, it's optional, but what type of organization do you represent? Do you represent a medical device manufacturer? Perhaps a company that has software as a medical device, including health analytics platforms. Perhaps you are from a device design or development company, a quality or regulatory organization. And if none of those 4 work for you, just go ahead and click Other. So I see some answers are coming in. Go ahead and just select either medical device manufacturer, software as a medical device, design development company, quality or regulatory, or other. All right, we'll go ahead and close our poll out. Thank you for providing your answers. So let's jump into it. John, I'm gonna kick things off with you. What is post-market surveillance? When we put a medical device in the commercial marketplace, we just sit back, we watch the dollars roll in. It's all easy street from that point on, right? Not so.
You hope so. And certainly, you know, there is that opportunity for sure if you've found an opportunity that addresses a true need to be addressed. But it is naive to think that you can just sit back, relax, and watch the dollars increase in your banking. I think one of the key things that I want folks to understand today is that post-market surveillance, it's really a continuum. You know, you design and develop a product, you launch it into the marketplace and into manufacturing, and there will be changes. There will be things that happen. Some of them are in your control. Many of them are not. There will be, people will use your products, hopefully in ways that you anticipate and that you hope, but there's a good chance that they're also going to use them in ways that you didn't anticipate or hope for or think about while you were designing and developing those products. Even when they do use the products in the correct way, there will be issues. There will be quality events. Some of those might be benign and relatively, you know, minor in the grand scheme of things. But there is other times, unfortunately, where things happen and it's an adverse event, or somebody might have gotten hurt or injured in the process of using your product correctly or incorrectly. And I think this is a really important thing for companies to understand about post-market surveillance is you have to manage that total product life cycle of that product. You have to understand all the things that could happen. You have to be prepared for managing and assessing and investigating quality events that happen in the field. And those quality events can come in the form of, customer feedback, could be complaints. Internally, you might be dealing with some non-conformances as you're going through manufacturing. You might come across some systemic issues that warrant escalation in the form of a CAPA and those sorts of things. So lots of things that you need to manage about the not only the design of that product, but also how it's manufactured and how it's used in the field. So lots of different moving parts and pieces with respect to post-market surveillance.
Can you comment briefly? We have some of the regulatory requirements in 21 CFR Part 822 versus ISO 13485. Can you compare and contrast a little bit for us there?
Sure. I mean, what I think in today, and I think there's a movement in our industry to make this more of a true statement, but I think there's a lot of harmonization when it comes to regulations for design development, as well as for post-market surveillance for med device companies. So obviously the 21 CFR Part 822 is FDA CDRH, whereas ISO 13485 is commonly regarded as outside the United States, so to speak. There is a movement from an FDA, and they've been talking about this for a bit, and I expect we'll see some progress on this, some meaningful progress on this yet in 2021, where FDA is moving towards adopting 1345 in lieu of the 820 and related regulations. But for all intents and purposes, there's an expectation that you're capturing what's happening, or that you're knowledgeable about what's happening with your products in use and in manufacturing, those sorts of things. So for all intents and purposes, I say there's a lot more similarities really than there are differences. I think historically speaking, from a post-market surveillance perspective, FDA has put more weight on managing adverse events and tracking those types of things and notifying FDA of those adverse events in the form of an MDR, not to be confused with EU MDR, but really dealing with issues in the field. And keep in mind, FDA's role, at least in the United States, with respect to medical devices, largely about protecting and promoting the health of U.S. citizens. So it kind of makes sense that they've put more emphasis on those adverse event types of scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Chris, what do you have to add from your perspective?
A couple things is that post-market surveillance is still a very much manual thing, paper thing. You're having to request and pull information out. What I'd like to kind of give some thoughts today is there better ways we can do that? Can we automate that process? And regardless of 822 and ISO 1345, from an engineering perspective, from a project management perspective, just knowing how your device works in the field, always wanting to do that continuous improvement, make the device better, you have to collect that information. So yes, it's required by the regulations, but it's also required, as engineers, to always build a better device moving forward, and you have to collect that information.
I'll ask one of you gentlemen as we segue into the next slide to comment on FDA MedWatch and the role that it plays in post-market surveillance.
Well, I mean, it plays a role. Again, it's primarily focused on negative events that have happened at point of use, generally speaking. So it is a glimpse. It is, but it's only a slice of what's really happening from the overall post-market surveillance, and it's that slice that's the negative thing that happened with product.
So let's talk about the reporting. Let's get into the current status quo, how post-market surveillance traditionally is done now, the mechanics of collecting the data, reporting the data. That's where the FDA MedWatch comes in. John, could you launch us during this segment?
Sure. And Keith, I'll go back to your opening statement about, hey, I've just launched a medical device, then we're just going to sit back and relax and just watch the money roll in. Unfortunately, a lot of companies, that's sort of their MO. It's sort of how they operate. Unfortunately, they're very reactive. They're waiting for things to happen from a post-market perspective. And when those things happen, then they're very much in a reactionary mode, oftentimes firefighting mode. I mean, you learn about an adverse event in your product. Of course, you want to dive right in and address the situation, or at least understand the situation. And you know that you have a responsibility and obligation not only to the patient and the physician or whomever that end user is, but also to the regulatory agencies to report that sort of information. And you want to prevent that from happening again, but the prevention comes after you already reacted to the situation. I think the opportunity that we have in this industry, and this is pervasive. I mean, this has been this way for as long as I've been in the industry. I think the opportunity, though, is to get ahead of it, to be more proactive, to try to learn about solicit feedback rather than wait for it to come to you. Go out in the field, talk to the people who are using the product, just try to gather more intel ahead of time, so that way, doing so will prevent from not all problems, but it's going to significantly reduce major issues from happening if you're staying in front of this.
And John, the way I view this is that traditionally a lot of the attitude is, well, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of resources, it's a cost that I just can't afford. I would encourage our audience to view that time, those resources, as an investment to support what you just said. Then it becomes not a reactive activity, but a proactive activity that can support our business objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a couple of these are almost antithetical to each other, but the cost of quality and the cost of poor quality, and I know a lot of companies are sort of challenged on measuring those sorts of attributes. But even if it's kind of buried in the weeds, so to speak, or as far as part of your operating costs, I mean, think about just the logistics. If you have an adverse event that happens, hopefully it doesn't, but it's likely, it's probable that it could happen, and now you have to react. This is going to create havoc in your company because you weren't planning for that. And so now you have to pull resources off of other initiatives so that they can focus on this investigation for this adverse event. Whereas the counter to that is, if you already plan for being proactive and getting this feedback ahead of time, it'll be less disruptive to your organization.
So that makes sense. Let's talk through an example of how this has worked in real life. Chris, I know you've got a case study that you'd like to share with the audience.
Sure, and I think John will agree with me when I say this, is that you can't inspect quality in, you need to design quality in. And right now, most of our post-market is reactive. Back when I was an engineer supporting field events, we would get complaints of high lead impedance. We had a class 3 neurostimulator that provided electrical stimulus through a helical coil, and there's something called fibrosis that would naturally build up and create more resistance. Our device was constant current, so we'd have to increase the battery voltage as that resistance built up. Eventually, sometimes the resistance would build up so high you wouldn't know about it. But our patients were on a cadence of only seeing the doctor once every 6 months, maybe even once a year. So what happens between that 1 and 6 months? What happens between that 1 and 12 months? You don't know. And so if you had a way to be proactive, to go out and read that lead impedance every day, you wouldn't react. You could predict when you're going to hit that maximum power availability of that device. There's also a syndrome, and this is real life, it's called the Twiddler syndrome. There's a lead that runs underneath your skin, and some patients would take their fingers and they would twiddle that lead. That would introduce mechanical fatigue. Eventually that lead would break. How would you, and then you're not delivering therapy. If you're not delivering therapy, the disease state returns. How would you know that in a reactive sense? You wouldn't until you went and visited the doctor and got interrogated. And so through connectivity and having real-time analysis, or just getting your data once a day, you could get an instant reading of your battery level, predict EOS, end of service. You could also predict when that lead would fail through fatigue and diagnostics and the increase of the resistance. And so we have opportunity now to be very proactive, design quality in and just not react to it.
So that's a good baseline that post-market surveillance can be tedious, can be viewed as a cost, but if we employ tools and technology, we can it can act as a force multiplier on those resources. One area of tools and technology is electronic QMS, such as Greenlight Guru. John, if somebody involved in post-market surveillance were to utilize electronic QMS, what enhancements would they enjoy? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the things that we've incorporated into the Greenlight Guru medical device success platform, have built out some functionality to leverage some AI and some machine learning. So why does that matter with respect to this particular topic? Well, we have workflows that guide users through, step by step on investigating a quality event, whether that's a customer feedback item, a complaint, an audit type of event, or even a non-conformance. We have those workflows to guide a user through that, and you can link those events to specific products. You can link them to specific records and specific drawings, or whatever the case may be. You can tie them together. And so the AI and the machine learning aspects of the Greenlight Guru success platform, we've got a couple of things that visualize, gives you a picture. So literally a picture, like a mind map. You can see how often that particular product has been impacted or involved in other scenarios. You can see if there were other quality events that were related to that particular product. You can see all the projects, all the design and development activities. You can see all the risk. You literally have a picture of that. And so that can give you some perspective as you're starting to evaluate, post-market surveillance types of activities. Furthermore, oftentimes when there are these quality events that happen and we go through the investigation, oftentimes this will result in some sort of change, maybe a change to a procedure, maybe a change to how we manufacture it, maybe a change in the design of the product itself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have incorporated intelligent document management powered by Halo that again incorporates this machine learning based on your company's data and information to help ensure that you're making thorough, robust, and holistic changes if and when you need them. So those are a couple of things that we've incorporated within the eQMS. The other thing, last thing I'll leave with is the Greenlight Guru platform. It's a connected ecosystem. So everything that you do throughout the entire product lifecycle, from design and development, through assessing your risk, through launching your product and manufacturing and managing all these quality events, all of these things are connected together. And at least in my 23-year experience, I'm not aware of any solution that has done this specifically for the medical device industry.
I have seen your product. I have used your product. It is, get a little commercial here. It is fantastic. And it ties back to my lead into this slide. It's a tool, it's a technology, but it can be used as a force multiplier to transition us from a reactive mode to a proactive mode, from a scramble mode to where we are addressing issues, but we're using them for business objectives as well. Chris, let's turn the conversation to you. In the same way, what enhancements for post-market surveillance would be gained by cloud connectivity? You've already kind of set the stage for this with your case study, but let's take it a couple steps further.
Sure, and before I comment on this, I just have to give a big shout out to John, because back when I was involved with design engineering and paper quality management systems, a complaint would come in, would trigger a CAPA. You might have to go back to design requirements, risk analysis, verification protocols, verification summary reports. Greenlight has something called closed loop traceability. So during audits, there would be that thread. You would have to show objective evidence of the initial complaint all the way out through the entire design history of that change. It was very hard to do, and we got tripped up a lot on the paper process. Greenlight has automated all that through their closed loop traceability. Huge value add, huge value add. So thanks, John, for that feature. It's a great feature. Types of data that can be collected. any type of data, from very little to device history or to patient data. It all depends on what the manufacturer wants to do. Let's talk about automating the data of the device. And so, again, most medical devices aren't connected. And if you had access to the health and status of your device or programming history, sometimes we'd have patients come in and we'd have a diagnostic failure, and that would leave the generator at 0 output. We wouldn't know about it for months. Would there be value in knowing the state of that generator, the state and health? There is no equivalent of a check engine light. I think I've said this before, but if you had the equivalent of a check engine light, there's something wrong with your battery, you've had your ASIC start to fail or some other component in your device, is there value in that? When we supported clinical trials, as a device engineer, I'd have to go out, and back then we would do paper records and then we transcribe those over the statistician. And very often I would get called in when there was an anomaly, and it turned out that we'd have to go and pull the programming history from the database. That was hard to do in a clinical study or in practice, because you would have to schedule the doctor's office, you'd have to get access to that medical equipment, which isn't always easy to do. Sometimes you'd have to do it before hours or after hours. The quickest we ever got information back following up a complaint was 2 weeks. It took us normally about 6 weeks to follow up on a complaint. If you could automate that, you could reduce the time of complaint history, cutting that time in half, at the same time serving your patients. So there's huge value, I think, in having connectivity and having access to your data real time.
Chris, do you mind if I chime in, or I guess maybe I should ask Keith this, but when you were describing the example earlier about the fibrin buildup on the lead, it just triggered a thought. Like, a lot of my early formative years in the med device industry were mechanical products, and I was reminded as you were sharing that story, we had a catheter that we had developed that had antibiotics impregnated into the catheter, and it was revolutionary at that time. Bloodstream infections, catheter-related bloodstream infections is a big deal in a lot of different use cases. So we were, developed this product to prevent that. And I remember, soon after we did so, we started getting some complaints, some feedback about some of the lumens of the catheter were obstructed. And we would get some of the products back, and we would do an investigation, and we were just stumped, and we spent a lot of time traveling back and forth to different facilities to observe and see, okay, what is going on? And 2021 is like, there's technology that's relatively affordable that could probably be easily incorporated even into a mechanical type of device like a catheter that could give me some diagnostics and some input that it would have made life so much easier just to have that,
Well, absolutely. And sorry, Keith, getting a little off subject, but we have some of our customers that got shut down at their clinical trials because of COVID. Some of our customers that had connectivity, they could still do some limited or at least pilot clinical studies because they didn't have to send a clinician out into the field or monitor. They could get the information back real time and still prove objective evidence that their device was performing as prescribed. So lots of opportunity there.
Chris, the picture you paint in my mind of traditional data input for post-market surveillance versus employing cloud connectivity, it's like going out to the mailbox every day to see if there's anything interesting in there and relying that every piece of mail is going to be delivered. Versus, here in the Houston area, we've got NASA mission control just right down the road, being in that huge control room where you have dashboards galore, giving you real-time data, analyzed, assimilated, and graphically displayed. It's really, it's not apples and oranges, it's apples and elephants, the contrast. In value, that real-time collection of data provides to your organization, not just for post-market surveillance. And so that's a good segue into our final of 5 topics before we get to the Q&A. We've talked a lot about electronic QMS and the enhancements it provides, and the same thing with medical device cloud connectivity. What if we used both tools at the same time? Made the investment, made the commitment to not be reactive, but to be proactive in our viewpoint towards post-market surveillance. How would this look? Who wants to launch us in this final discussion topic?
I'll take the first pass and then let John follow up. First, you have to get the complaint information, and the Galen cloud can facilitate that. You could have real-time analysis of your data. You can have real-time diagnostics events sent back. You could check on your data, your all kinds of performance, and then also patient data. You could, as we build out these data lakes, we can learn and predict digital health issues within this patient. But it starts with the complaint. So the Galen system can capture the complaint information, quickly determine if it's a real complaint or if it's not, and then we would hand it over to John, the Greenlight Guru system, where they actually track and manage that complaint. John?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, some of the things that Chris and I are talking about today, I can imagine many of you may think this seems like this is out there visionary thinking, and maybe some of it that is true. However, it is reality. It is entirely possible, as we were speaking today, to do all of this, to have real-time information about the performance of your product coming to you so that you can assess and be proactive and get ahead of things and better predict what is going on with your products and processes, and then take the necessary action. You know, if you get this information and you're like, oh wow, there's something here that is trending in a direction that might warrant further investigation. Well, then now you can incorporate the workflow to do so. You can go through all those steps. You can do a proper investigation. You can identify some of the root cause opportunities and then mitigate that before it becomes a big deal. So this is reality. This is now. This is something you absolutely can do today. There is some investment. There is there is a little bit of a learning curve, but you've got great resources at Galen Data and at Greenlight Guru. This is what we do for a living. We build these products to help make your life easier.
Well, we're quick on trend analysis. I mean, we're required by the regulations to do trend analysis. Do your projections of battery life match with the parameters programmed? I come back to lead impedance and resistance. You just don't do trend analysis over a single device. You can do it over a population of 100, 1,000, 10,000 devices. We can automate all that, and then we could set triggers. If you exceed 2K ohms and say on your impedance, we can automatically set up alerts. That could do an investigation, and then the Greenlight Guru platform manages the entire quality of all that. So, and one other word about paper. If any of you guys are doing paper out there, it just doesn't make sense in today's world. And so there's lots of systems, and the Greenlight Guru platform is incredible at reducing, you know, all kinds of paper.
I want to focus our conversation a bit on the third bullet, talk about artificial intelligence. John, you've shared with us how the Greenlight Guru product has AI embedded to guide the users through a multitude of workflows. Chris, at least one of our clients has embedded their AI-based software as a medical device within the Galen cloud successfully. How would AI work in the context of post-market surveillance? We've talked about data coming into our post-market surveillance activity in real time. We've talked about, as we see on the last bullet here, reducing the error that is typically manifest with manual entry. But let's take the discussion one step further. We've got a lot of data. It has no gaps. It is in real time. What advantages would AI provide?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, a little bit of a disclaimer. AI in its truest form would mean that the thing learns and adapts and adjusts, right? And there are products and platforms out there that do just that sort of thing. It's a little bit complicated, frankly, in the med device space because the regulatory framework and mindset isn't quite ready for that, right? And that's a whole different topic in and of itself. So a lot of products that are there that have the potential for AI, they're somewhat constrained a little bit because they needed to go through some sort of process generally to get clearance or approval or whatever the case may be, and that's based on a certain set of data construct and so on. So there is a little bit, and if the product evolves and changes and gathers data, then generally speaking, the current expected behavior more times than not would be that the company needs to do a follow-on submission or update with regulatory bodies such as FDA. So there is a little bit of opportunity, I think, for our industry to be a little bit more open-minded with respect to AI in general. It's not without some nuances and some challenges. But I think that the real opportunity here is really more, AI is sort of the big umbrella, but more in the machine learning aspects of that, at least from the Greenlight perspective, is that it feeds data and information to you about the performance of your processes, so that still requires a little bit of human intervention to assess and evaluate what to do next. At least, that's my take on that particular question, Keith.
Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I studied artificial intelligence in graduate school, so this is a subject that is near and dear to me. With that being said, John is correct. AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence is a new frontier for the regulatory space. But as engineers, we like to push those boundaries. And the FDA, a few months ago, did clear a first ever machine learning algorithm or techniques. Now you can put safety valves, you can neural networks and things like that. You can put safety valves and take gradual steps. We're not talking about building, the next HAL computer, but we can take steps. One of the analogies is a heart pump. We could use AI to detect vibrations and predict when a bearing is going to fail due to maybe a manufacturing change. And you don't do it on one device, you do it on entire populations or even cross populations of devices. So AI is here, it's coming. As with medical device, as the sophisticated medical device technology is, we tend to lag the technology curve six or so years. But that's starting to change, and it's exciting times for sure.
And I'll note for our audience that our July 2020 webinar last year was on the specific topic of data analytics for medical devices. If you go to galendata.com, look for our webinars and then scroll down to the July webinar. Mercury Data Science was our guest for that webinar, an excellent overview of many different facets of the application of machine learning, AI, and data analytics to medical devices. All right, good discussion, guys. As I predicted at the beginning, we covered a lot of ground. We'll have time for final thoughts here in a second, but before we do, I'd like to run our second poll, which is to ask our audience, if we can go ahead and launch our poll, what is your post-market surveillance posture? First choice is we're performing post-market surveillance successfully now. Second choice, our current post-market surveillance could bear improvement, perhaps through some of the suggestions we've made today. Number 3, we could use help planning our post-market surveillance strategy. Haven't entered it yet, could use some help planning your strategy. Number 4, post-market surveillance is too far out to even think about now. And then 5, it just doesn't apply to us. So choice 1, we're performing post-market surveillance successfully now. Number 2, we could bear some improvement in our current post-market surveillance activity. Number 3, we could use some help planning our post-market surveillance strategy. 4, it's too far out to think about. And then 5, it does not apply to us. You could make a quick choice. It's optional, but make a quick choice in the console. We'd appreciate it. All right, we will go ahead and close our poll out. Thank you, Mr. Producer. So let's wrap things up before we get to the Q&A with your next steps. John, I'll toss it over to you. If you could suggest to the audience one thing to think about, one thing to lead with, what would it be?
It's not simple, but it is important. It's total product life cycle and managing that total product life cycle. My experience and observation of practices in the industry is that we sort of take a bimodal process. We do a pretty good job of the design and development side of things. We launch, But then when we're in the production era of that product, we're more reactionary. We're not getting ahead of it. And I think, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. And if you've heard me talk on these sorts of topics before, you've heard me say these sorts of things, but we have to do something different because is it working now? Yeah, I guess. Could it be better? Absolutely. How could it be better? Well, we got to be more proactive. And I think that proactive nature will better connect the pre and post market activities and making sure we're better managing that total product life cycle.
Chris, how about you? Your final thought. What's your one word of advice for our audience?
I got 2 words: get connected. We live in a connected world. Medical devices aren't connected. Galen is hoping to change that to be competitive in a connected world. It just makes sense to be connected. COVID, we we'll have that disease state behind us, but there's no reason why you can't have access to your medical device data, the current state of your device. We live in a connected world. It's time to get connected.
And I'll add a couple words of advice. Please view Greenlight Guru, Galen Data as your partners to help you on your journey, whether you become our customers or not. So if you feel that electronic QMS can benefit you today, reach out to Natalie Boone at Greenlight Guru, and she can certainly start you on your path of exploration there. If you need help with your cloud connectivity strategy, reach out to us. Galen Data can help. We'd love to have a conversation with you just to see what benefits cloud connectivity could afford you. Before we go to our Q&A, I'll announce next month's webinar, 3 weeks from today. The title is Considerations for Medical Device Cloud Connectivity. It's going to be a broad webinar. Our host is the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, Abbas Dilawala of Galen Data. We're going to cover a lot of ground as well. Some of it you may already know, others are maybe gaps. So I would recommend that you attend. You can register right now. We're posting the registration link in the chat window, and I hope that everybody can join us next month. All right, let's move on to our Q&A. As a reminder, you can submit your questions in the questions window in the GoToWebinar console. A recording of the video of today's webinar will be made available. So with that, we've got a lot of questions coming in already. Chris, the first question is for you. Question reads, my device is class 1, so the FDA does not require post-market surveillance. However, ISO 13485 does require post-market surveillance. So do I really have to do it?
So that's a great question. So FDA post-market is most applicable to class 2 and class 3 devices. If you're ISO certified, you don't have a choice. If you ISO certified requires you to be, do post-market surveillance activities such as track complaints, issue CAPAs. From an engineering point of view, absolutely. I don't think it's a have to. I think it's a must do. You need to track the operational use of your device. If you go outside the United States, it's just the reverse. All medical devices need to do post-market surveillance or have an exemption. So it's a great question, but it's just good. In short, there's different ways to do it, but it's just a good idea to track the operational use of your device.
John, anything to add there?
I do. Just piling on what Chris offered. We shouldn't be doing things in the medical device industry just because the regulations say or don't say we should do something. And I think this is one of those cases. You're running a business. This just makes, number one, good business sense, first and foremost. But if you choose to only do things because the regulations say thou shalt do it, keep in mind that FDA is moving to 1345. It will happen. It will happen this year. I don't know. Will it happen next year? I don't know. But it will happen because the regulations, as we know them, they're relatively in the U.S. are relatively static. 13485. There's a working group and a committee of which FDA is a member of, and they're constantly meeting to update and revolve this standard to keep up with current best practices and expectations. So F13485 is dynamic, it's evolving, whereas the regulations sometimes can get a little bit static on things. So I think those are a couple of points that I would encourage people to keep in mind too.
Very good. The questions are coming in fast and furious, so let me get to some more. Would you approach post-market surveillance activities according to the device type / class, or should you always follow the same approach to post-market surveillance? John, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of depends. It's going to depend on what the potential event was in some respects. I mean, if you're dealing with an adverse event, that's you got to get on it, because the time is ticking from that perspective, and you want to make sure you're trying to understand the scope, I guess, or the impact is another way to think about it. Is this an isolated event, or is this all the products that we have in our field? I mean, to me, the process is somewhat ubiquitous, regardless of the product. I need to understand scope. I need to do maybe an immediate correction to kind of stop this from happening another time if I can. I need to do pretty thorough investigation, identify the root cause, and then from there, once I know that, then my action plan will vary depending on the product or product type or the type of issue. But I think generally speaking, you can employ a very methodical approach to this. It's just understand the problem and what do you need to do to correct the issue, and then further prevent it from occurring again, if at all possible.
Very good. Next question gets into an area that we didn't touch on a whole lot today. Chris, I'll ask you to take this one regarding cybersecurity post-market surveillance. The question reads, so there's post-market surveillance and cybersecurity post-market surveillance. These can be quite different. Can you comment on that for us, Chris?
Sure. With connectivity, we have to have enforcement of cybersecurity. Now, just for the record, Galen takes care of all that. We encrypt in transit and at rest. But not only do you have to do the traditional post-market surveillance for device operation, but you also now have to look for cybersecurity threats. How can you mitigate? How can you protect those denial of services? If you see repeated, attacks of denial of services of trying to gain, your web portal. So now we have to have tools and processes in place, not just to do traditional post-market on the device, but also as we get connected more on the cybersecurity. It's a great question. It's evolving, but that's one of the things Galen is very good at, is protecting against those type of threats.
Very good. Next question. How will the FDA look at increased numbers of post-market surveillance events? More complaints?
Yeah. Can I take that one, Keith?
Go for it.
So there might be a misconception is because I'm connected or I'm asking for more information, logically I'll have more complaints. And I would actually argue the reverse is true. For example, back in a previous life, we would have a wand that had a 9-volt battery. The battery would die. It's not a complaint if a known condition is forecasted. Most medical devices have batteries. Eventually, at some point, they will die. And so if you can't communicate with your device, it's not a malfunction of the design. The battery died in the wand. And so it's a natural occurrence. The life projection of my device was projected to last 6 months or six years, but it only lasted a year and a half. You pull those programmable parameters, and you're in a hyper state. You're driving that pulse generator to its maximum performance. You can very well collect that information, not have to fly a team out there and diagnose it. It may or may not be a valid complaint, but I would argue just the reverse is that you can cut the time of complaints in half, and you can actually quickly, proactively determine if it's a complaint or not and close it out.
Chris, I'm so glad you described that scenario. I agree 100%. I think there's a naive mindset in some respects that if I have more complaints, then that's going to be a bad thing. Maybe, but not always. There's not certainty there. Now, Keith, the caveat to your question is if I have a product that has an increased number of adverse events, significant adverse events, then yeah, most assuredly, I'm probably going to become a blip on the FDA radar screen because that says that I don't have control of my products. And the scenario that Chris described is a way to get control of your products.
Understood, understood. John, I'm going to ask you on the next question to take the lead. How will this, everything we've discussed today, fit into the new ISO 14971 risk management standard that was just released, I think, about 1.5 years ago?
Yeah, so that was, you're right, about December of 2019. And I also advise people to, there's a kind of a companion guidance document that goes with the 14971 standard. That's 24971, and that came out in early 2020. Gives a lot more insights and guidance, so check those out. But risk management is, to be somewhat redundant from what I shared a moment ago, it is a total product lifecycle process. Everything that we do in a as a medical device professional, as medical device companies, we have to employ risk-based methodologies in our decision-making process. It's very important that we incorporate those with our products and product management and product lifecycle management. It's an event happens. Chris described the scenario. You get a complaint, you get data and information, about a battery failure. Technically, that's a complaint. Well, what's the risk of that, right? You need to assess and evaluate that and determine what sort of mitigation and control you need to put in place. So it's important. It's very important that companies incorporate that total product lifecycle approach with respect to risk management too.
Chris and John, but start with you, Chris. How do you assure HIPAA compliance when gathering patient data?
Great question. And we start at the top, design controls 820.30, 1345. There's a software standard 62304. There's risk analysis 14971. Handful of guidance documents. The HIPAA guidance, we encrypt, we protect data. All the best practices of cybersecurity. We're going to have our high trust rating by September of this year, building more defenses around the Galen platform. And so it's not any one thing you do. I do not have access to any data on the Galen platform, even being the CEO of the company. Procedurally, I don't have access. And so you have your tools in place, you have your processes in place, you have your active monitoring in place. And so we do it 1,000 different ways but of course we're compliant, and even just the basic HIPAA requirements are straightforward. We go way above and beyond that, protecting that, and ultimately the manufacturer decides what to send. So maybe the manufacturer doesn't want to send patient name and serial number, they just want to send a 3-patient ID. So it's multifaceted. There's many layers to this, but it's one of the things we do, and we do it very well.
Thank you. John, anything to add there?
No, Chris crushed that one, so that's his domain.
All right, the next one I think we'll toss to you, John. It's a little long, so bear with me. What are your thoughts on virtual manufacturers who hold ISO 13485 MDSAP and receive products from contract manufacturers who hold standard ISO 1345? Can we rely on their post-market surveillance alone? So an inheritance type question.
I was good with all of that question until you added that last word, alone. And the reason for that, I don't the MDSAP or MDSAP or however you prefer to say it. I know some regulatory people will probably throw their hands up in the air and saying that I'm crazy, but It is a difference without a huge distinction with respect to post-market surveillance. In my opinion, it's a different vehicle to help minimize and streamline some of my audits with regulatory bodies. I know I'm oversimplifying, I get that, but to me, it's less about whether or not I'm MD-SAP or ISO 13485. It's about making sure that I've got the right processes and methodologies in place to effectively manage post-market events. Just relying on a contract manufacturer, just taking their word for it at face value, well, I mean, I better have a really good relationship with that supplier. I better have a proven track record with that supplier. I have to earn that opportunity, so that supplier needs to earn that opportunity, so to speak. So that's going to put more weight, less weight on my post-market surveillance processes and more weight on my supplier management processes if I choose that path. I think it's good to have those sorts of relationships, and I would encourage folks to not just take it at face value, to be a part of that review process, be a part of their investigation process. Maybe you're not a core team member doing so, but there should be a communication pathway that's established if and when these sorts of situations come up, where I'm an active participant in that process.
It makes sense. Makes sense. We've got time for one, maybe two more questions. Chris, next one's for you. Could you give an example of post-market surveillance by combining patient data with device data? Good question.
Yeah, no, that's great. So when I was involved with a product that required a PMA, the FDA came back and said, it was a large double-blind study. We received clearance. The FDA came back and said, you need to follow the patients that were in that study for another 5 years doing post-market. So one of the things we'd look for is adverse events. We would titrate, it was electrical stimulation, and we would titrate the patients up to a certain level. If we over titrated them, there would be a painful event, and we could record that. We're also looking for what's the most effective parameter stimulations that received efficacy. And so per the study, we'd be collecting all this information for an additional 5 years post clearance. That is definitely patient study combined with the post-market surveillance. And so it was a very practical operational study where we were collecting patient data and monitoring the health and status of not only the device, but also the patient through the collection of the parameters we were getting.
Very good. John, in the 1.5 minutes we have left for the Q&A, I'm gonna toss the last one to you. How does information from the electronic post-market surveillance get imported into Greenlight system? Automatically? Suppose it depends on what type of data we're talking about, what type of information.
Right. I mean, there's from our product perspective, I mean, there's opportunities that are on our roadmap to sort of streamline that sort of information. So that it can be more asynchronous and automated. Today, frankly, there's quite a bit of opportunity, or there's still a need for human intervention in many cases to upload data and information. We're working with a lot of different exciting things. I mentioned some of the machine learning and AI components that we've been incorporating into our platform, and there's some things that we're developing in the not too distant future that will be a way for that information to sort of feed into the platform a little bit more easily. But frankly, today a lot of that data and information that needs to be added into your Greenlight environment does require that human intervention.
Very good, that makes sense. Well, I'm afraid we have run out of time. I'd like to thank you, John and Chris, for an engaging discussion today. And thanks to our audience for attending in the first place, and also for your very insightful questions. If we did not answer your question today, we will reply, either Greenlight Guru or Galen Data. We will reply via email. We look forward to seeing everyone at a future Galen Data webinar. Please let us know if there's anything that we can do to help you with before then. Thanks again for attending, and goodbye.